I'm Anna, 30 years old. On paper, I'm the founder of a tech company worth over $1 billion. But if you saw me step onto the M15 bus every morning in Manhattan, you'd never guess I owned a tech empire. I still live in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side, cook simple meals, and usually choose inexpensive sneakers over sparkling high heels. To me, freedom matters more than fame. I was born into the Montgomery family, where money and status were always the measure of a person's worth. My father, Robert Montgomery, built his career in New York real estate. He once turned a small plot in Brooklyn into the first step toward owning multiple office towers. My mother, Margaret, was the daughter of an old upper-class family, her name tied to major charities and historic buildings in Boston. To everyone else, I was the daughter born with every privilege possible. What few understood was how lost I often felt in my own family. The dinners at our estate in Connecticut felt more like stage performances, where relatives competed to show off diamonds, luxury cars, and lavish vacations. My cousins, especially Jason, believed flaunting wealth was the only way to prove value. Every time we met, Jason made sure to emphasize his success with cutting remarks. "Anna, you're still riding the bus?" Jason would sneer, jangling the keys to his new Lamborghini. "Hard to believe someone like you puts up with the crowd." I just smiled, staying quiet. In my family, pushing back only made things worse. My mother often frowned when she saw me in simple jeans instead of the Chanel dresses she sent. She never said it outright, but her eyes made it clear. My simplicity was her disappointment. I wasn't like them. I wanted to prove myself on my own path, not by leaning on the family name. After graduating from Stanford, I turned down an offer to join my father's real estate company. That decision shocked everyone. My father stayed calm, but I saw the disbelief in his eyes. My mother burst into tears, insisting I was destroying a golden future. My cousins laughed. "You're crazy, Anna," Jason said the night I shared my choice. "People dream of working for Montgomery and you're throwing it away for something vague." I didn't argue. Deep down, I knew I didn't belong to their world. I needed a direction of my own, one where value wasn't measured by credit cards or brand names on a wrist. That path was anything but easy. I started with a low-paying job at a tech startup in San Francisco. Many nights I stayed awake hunched over an old laptop, eating cheap instant noodles, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake by turning down the safe road my parents laid out. Yet each morning, walking among regular workers, I felt lighter. I knew I was living true to myself, not a replica of a prestigious family. That choice made me the odd one out among the Montgomerys. They showed off diamond rings. I wore an old silver bracelet. They bragged about yachts. I shared stories about helping a corner grocery store increase sales with data analytics. To them it sounded small and laughable. To me it proved I was creating real value. My father sometimes watched quietly, though he rarely spoke. He didn't show much emotion, but I knew his eyes followed my progress. My mother never understood. She wanted me to be the perfect daughter in silk dresses at charity galas, alongside a husband of equal status. I knew I had gone against everything my family expected. But in doing so, I found my own identity. I didn't need the Montgomery spotlight nor Jason's pitying looks. All I needed was a chance to prove that success isn't something to display. It's something built from passion and persistence. And so, while my entire family branded me the one who lives differently, I kept walking my path, a path without red carpets, but one leading to a lasting value they had never touched. I still remember clearly the moment I first set foot in the small office of a tech startup in San Francisco. I was 24, fresh out of Stanford with an MBA, holding in my hands an easy ticket into my father's real estate empire. But I chose a completely different path. The company I joined had nothing worth showing off. An office of barely 1,000 square feet, patched-together desks, and old servers that broke down constantly. Yet the atmosphere was full of energy, and to me that was life. In the beginning, my work wasn't prestigious, like people imagined for a Stanford graduate. I made coffee, took notes during meetings, and rewrote financial reports. But I didn't feel ashamed. I knew that from these small tasks I would learn how a real business worked. Just over a year later, I was promoted to product manager. Each day felt like a relentless race. We were running out of money, the product unfinished, customers skeptical. Many nights I sat alone in front of the glowing screen, my heart heavy with doubt. Am I burying my future? And just when collapse seemed close, I met a man who changed everything. His name was Richard Coleman, 65 years old, founder of 3 successful tech companies and known in Silicon Valley as a master of the field. He was invited to be an advisor for our startup. The first time I saw him, I was struck by his simplicity. A man of immense wealth, yet he still drove an old Ford, wore a worn sweater and shoes long past their shine. He came to the office like an ordinary engineer, never asking for attention. I remember our first meeting with him. While everyone argued loudly about product strategy, Richard listened in silence. Then he simply said, "If you can't answer why customers need you, every plan is meaningless." The room went quiet. I looked at him and felt as though a door had just opened. From then on, I sought every chance to learn from Richard. I asked questions, requested feedback, even invited him to dinner at a small corner diner. That night, he told me about his painful failures. His first company went bankrupt after 2 years, and at one point he mortgaged his house just to pay employees. "People only see the spotlight," he said with a gentle smile, "but true success is getting back up from the ashes." He became my mentor. I learned more from him than any classroom had ever taught me. He showed me how to analyze markets, how to manage people, but most importantly, he taught me this philosophy: real value isn't in what you show off, but in the impact you create for others. On my birthday, Richard handed me a small box. Inside was a vintage watch, simple in design but flawless in detail. "I designed this myself when I was a young engineer," he said, his eyes gleaming with nostalgia. "It's been with me for 3 decades through failure and success. Now it belongs to you. Never forget that time is the most precious asset, and every moment should be used to create true value." I was speechless. From that day, the watch never left my wrist. 3 months later, Richard passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The news shattered me. The mentor who had given me purpose was gone. I sat in my tiny apartment all night, staring at the watch, feeling as if part of my heart had been taken away. But I knew he wouldn't want me to collapse. After many sleepless nights, I decided to start my own company. I sold my only car, emptied my savings, and raised funds from a few trusted friends. I named the company Coleman Analytics to honor his legacy. Our first product was a data analytics platform designed to help small businesses compete against large corporations. The early years were brutal. I worked 18 hours a day, survived on instant noodles, and more than once faced the edge of bankruptcy. But whenever I thought of quitting, I looked at Richard's watch on my wrist. His words echoed, "Real value lies in impact." That kept me moving. Then came the turning point. A major client in Chicago tested our platform and achieved remarkable success. They recommended us to a large hospital chain. That contract opened doors nationwide. Within just 3 years, Coleman Analytics grew from a 6-person team into a company worth over $1 billion, with offices in 3 major cities. When the press began covering our rise, I declined interviews, unwilling to be portrayed as a female tech billionaire. I still lived in my small apartment, rode the bus, and had my usual bagel for breakfast. To my family, I remained simply the odd one out. The Montgomery family dinner was a tradition no one was allowed to miss. Every October, the whole clan gathered at my parents' estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The house spanned tens of thousands of square feet, with a white marble entryway and meticulously trimmed gardens, looking more like a museum than a home. Just passing through the wrought iron gates, I could already feel the familiar atmosphere of showing off. A long line of Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and Ferraris parked at the entrance, arranged neatly so every eye could admire them. I arrived by Uber. The driver, an older man with dark skin, took me there in his beat-up Toyota Camry. He whistled softly when he saw the mansion. "Your family must be very wealthy," he said. I smiled faintly. "They are." As I stepped out, a few guests standing on the porch glanced my way, then quickly turned aside as if my modest arrival disrupted the glamorous scene. I wore dark jeans, a plain white shirt, and a light blazer. It wasn't chosen to make a statement, it was simply comfortable. But I knew for sure, to my relatives, it would become something to gossip about. As I entered the grand hall, classical music floated from the violins hired for the evening. My mother, Margaret, hurried over and kissed both my cheeks. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, briefly tightening before she forced a polite smile. "Anna, you look very different." I heard the undertone but only nodded. My father, Robert, chatting with my uncle Frank, waved at me, his expression faintly warmer. All my cousins had arrived. Jason, ever the competitor, wore a custom Milan suit, one leg crossed to show off his gleaming gold watch. Next to him, his new wife, a young model, was busy snapping pictures of a vintage wine glass. Across the table, my cousin Olivia boasted about her newly purchased Manhattan penthouse with its private theater and walnut bar. The room buzzed with stories of jewelry, cars, and extravagant vacations. I was about to quietly choose a seat when Jason suddenly stood. With a half-smile and a voice loud enough for all to hear, he called out, "Anna, still taking the bus? Or did you splurge on Uber just for tonight?" The room rippled with laughter. A few eyes looked uneasy, but most were amused. My mother flushed, quickly interjecting, "Jason, that's rude." But he shrugged. "I'm just asking. A successful businesswoman should at least own a car, right?" I sat down calmly. "The bus takes me where I need to go. So does Uber. Not as bad as you think." Jason burst out laughing, pointing toward the bright red Ferrari parked outside. "Big difference, Anna. Ever try 0 to 60 in 3 seconds? A bus can barely crawl down the street." The table roared again. I didn't react. Inside, I heard the steady ticking from the watch on my wrist. Richard Coleman's gift. It reminded me, true value never needs display. I scanned the room. Cousin Sophie flaunted a diamond necklace. Aunt Linda animatedly described her vacation in St. Tropez. It felt endless, like a performance without an intermission. I felt as though I stood in a parallel world. One side filled with contracts and engineers striving to build something real, the other drenched in hollow luxury. Amid the chatter, my father leaned toward me and asked quietly, "Are you tired? You look a little strained." I shook my head. He paused as though he wanted to say more, then turned back to Uncle Frank. The clink of crystal glasses signaled dinner was about to begin. I took my seat right next to Jason. He leaned in, his whisper loud enough for a few others nearby. "You know, the whole family wonders how a Montgomery can keep living like some broke college kid. Don't your parents give you anything you want?" I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady. "Maybe because I don't need it." Jason raised an eyebrow, ready to retort, but the bell rang as the appetizers were served. The conversation paused, but I knew their watchful eyes would follow my every move through the rest of the evening. Jason still wasn't ready to quit. When the main course was served, he leaned back in his chair, raising his voice loud enough to drown out the music. "Anna, next time call me, I'll give you a Ferrari test drive. Maybe then you'll finally let go of your bus obsession." A few people burst out laughing, others chuckled awkwardly. I didn't answer, just quietly lifted my glass of water. At that moment, my father, Robert, suddenly frowned, his eyes fixed on my wrist. "Wait," he set his spoon down, his deep voice cutting through the chatter around the table. "Anna, let me see the watch you're wearing." The entire table turned toward me. Slightly unsettled, I pulled up my sleeve. The crystal chandelier caught the watch face, casting a sharp but gentle glint. My father held his breath for a few seconds, then stood, leaning in closer. He whispered, but loud enough for all to hear, Is this one of the Coleman originals?" The room went silent. Uncle Frank raised his brows in disbelief. Jason frowned, still not understanding. My mother's eyes widened, her hand trembling around her fork and knife. I nodded slowly. "Yes. Richard Coleman himself gave it to me." The room erupted with murmurs. Aunt Linda nearly dropped her wine glass onto the pristine tablecloth. Jason froze like a statue, his smug grin wiped clean. My father drew in a deep breath. Lifting his gaze, he declared, "This isn't just any accessory. Richard was one of Silicon Valley's greatest founders. Before he was famous, he handcrafted a limited run of watches. Only about 50 exist in the world. Today, each one is valued at no less than $2 million, often higher." The clatter of silverware echoed across the table. Olivia gasped, $2 million? On Anna's wrist. I laid my arm gently on the table, speaking calmly. "He gave it to me on my 27th birthday. He said it had been with him through failure and success, and now it belonged with me. Not for its price, but for what it represents." Jason's jaw clenched, though he forced out a question. "Wait, how did you even know Richard Coleman?" "He was notoriously private, barely ever socialized." I smiled faintly. He was the one who guided me in my early days in San Francisco. When my startup was struggling, he was the only one who believed in me and made the first investment. More than that, he was a mentor, a friend, the one who showed me what true value means. No one spoke. Every eye was on me, and the watch glowing softly under the chandelier. I could feel the shift in the air, from cheap mockery minutes ago, to stunned silence tinged with unease. My father leaned back in his chair, his eyes shining with pride and emotion. He never told me. I met his gaze, my voice steady. Because I wanted to stand on my own. I didn't need anyone to know. I only needed to follow what I believe in. The table remained steeped in awkward quiet. Jason swallowed hard, his face flushed. He no longer had the nerve to taunt me. Olivia kept staring as if trying to decide whether I was lying. My mother was the first to break the silence. Her voice trembled slightly. Anna, if this is true, then you've kept too much from the family. I looked her in the eye. I didn't keep it hidden. I chose to live simply. Because my mentor once told me, the moment you need to prove your worth with possessions, you've already lost your true value. The words hung in the air, pressing down on everyone. The violins still played in the background, yet the room felt smaller, heavier. I brushed my fingertips across the watch face. It was more than a gift. It was a promise between Richard and me. A promise to live by his philosophy. Success isn't meant for display but to create impact. Every eye was still locked on the watch on my wrist, but I knew it was time to reveal another truth. I wanted them to see me as who I really was, not just a broke Montgomery, or someone lucky enough to be handed a relic from an old mentor. Jason swallowed hard, trying to sound casual. The watch is impressive, Anna. But, you still haven't answered. What do you actually do? Is your startup even still alive? I set my fork and knife down, my voice calm but clear enough for everyone to hear. Not only alive, it's thriving. Just last week, my company signed a $900 million contract with the federal government. The room froze. Aunt Linda dropped her spoon into her soup bowl, the clang ringing sharp. Olivia's eyes widened so much they looked ready to pop. Jason sat stiff, his face stone-like. My father furrowed his brow, gaze sharp. You said, a federal contract? In what field? I nodded, steady. Coleman Analytics has been chosen to implement a data analytics system for 3 federal agencies, projected to save taxpayers billions of dollars over the next 10 years. It's the biggest contract we've ever secured. Whispers rippled across the table. Faces swung between shock and doubt. My mother blurted out, $900 million? Anna, are you sure you haven't been tricked? The government choosing your company. I met her eyes, unshaken. I founded the company and still hold more than 60% ownership. It's currently valued at $1.8 billion after the latest funding round. And no, this isn't a fantasy. Major papers have already reported it. I just never brought it home to flaunt. A strangled gasp escaped Aunt Linda. Uncle Frank shook his head, muttering, $1.8 billion. This girl? Jason's face turned pale. He forced a weak laugh. So, that means you're a billionaire? I shrugged, my tone calm but firm. On paper, yes. But that doesn't matter. Most of my wealth is tied to the company, not cash, not sprawling mansions. I choose a simple life, because real value isn't measured by cars in the garage but by what we create for society. The table fell silent. I noticed my father's gaze soften, shifting from surprise to pride. Slowly, he nodded as if finally understanding the daughter he'd always thought of as different. Olivia suddenly blurted out, "Oh my God, Anna, yet you came here in an Uber? With that kind of money, you could buy every luxury car parked outside." I smiled, brushing my fingers across the watch face. And let them sit idle in a garage just for others to admire? Well, I'd rather use money another way. I want to invest in projects that help small shops, local hospitals, or kids struggling for education. That's what pride means to me. My words thickened the air. Jason dropped his gaze, gripping his glass so tightly the veins in his hand bulged. The same man who mocked me for having nothing to show was now caught in the most uncomfortable silence of his life. My mother, after a long pause, whispered, "Anna, you've hidden all of this? All these years?" I exhaled softly, scanning the table. I didn't hide. I just refused to be defined by a bank account. I want to be seen as a person, not a walking credit card. In that moment, the vast mansion felt smaller, its grand chandeliers and priceless paintings hollow. I knew I had dropped a bomb in the middle of the dinner table, and its shockwaves would linger. But I had no regret. This was the truth they had no choice but to face. The girl they once dismissed, mocked for riding the bus, was the one running a billion-dollar company. And more importantly, I didn't need their recognition to know my own worth. The air in the dining room was still heavy after I revealed my company's worth. But I knew if I stopped there, they would only remember the numbers, seeing me as some hidden billionaire. What I wanted, more importantly, was for them to understand why I chose this path. I brushed my fingers across the watch face and spoke, my voice not loud but steady and clear. Maybe you think success is the money in your account or the luxury items on the table. But my mentor, Richard Coleman, once told me, the moment you need to show off to prove your worth is the moment you've already lost your true value. A few shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Jason squinted, trying to mask his unease. Olivia's eyes stayed fixed on the watch. I continued, Richard wasn't poor. He could have bought anything. Yet for 30 years he lived in a small wooden house in Palo Alto, drove an old Ford, and devoted most of his wealth to education. He taught me that success isn't about how much you own, but the impact you leave behind. My father leaned back, his eyes bright with agreement. But Uncle Frank raised his brows, half skeptical, half mocking. So you're saying money doesn't matter? I looked straight at him. Money is a tool. What matters is how you use it. That's why I created the Coleman Foundation, to continue what my mentor never got to finish. Aunt Linda blinked. Foundation, what? For the first time that evening, I smiled comfortably. The Coleman Foundation for Tech Equity. We award full scholarships to students from underprivileged communities, provide laptops, training programs, even internships. This year, the first 50 students started. They dream of becoming engineers, data scientists, and I believe some of them will be the next founders. The table buzzed again, but this time with curiosity, not ridicule. Olivia hesitated. 50 students, is that much? With your resources, you could help thousands. I nodded, unflinching. We'll expand. The 10-year plan is to support 10,000 a year. But I wanted to start small to ensure each student is truly guided. I don't want the foundation to become a publicity stunt. I want it to be a real journey. My mother bit her lip, clearly still struggling with my way of thinking. She said softly, but Anna, fine, you can live in a small apartment and dress plainly. But at least why not let people know what you're doing? You could be the face of a new kind of lifestyle. I shook my head. I don't need spotlights. What I want is real impact. When a girl in Detroit writes her first line of code because of a laptop we gave, when a boy in New Orleans gets into college because of our mentorship, that's success. No headlines needed, no stage. Jason, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. His voice lacked its usual mockery, replaced by hesitation. I never thought of it that way. To me, success was always being known, cars, houses. But hearing you, I'm not sure anymore. I looked at him, not with sarcasm but gently. You're not wrong, Jason. Everyone measures differently. But remember, possessions lose value fast. The impact we leave lasts. Another silence fell. But unlike before, this one was heavier, because it forced each of them to confront their own way of living. My father broke it, his voice hoarse but resolute. Daughter, I've built some of Manhattan's tallest towers. But hearing you, I wonder if what I've left behind is as enduring as the students you're helping. His eyes met mine, no longer just surprised but filled with respect. I saw it clearly, and for the first time in years I felt the distance between us fading. I tightened my wrist slightly, listening to the familiar ticking. Richard's watch wasn't just marking time. It was reminding me, every passing second is a chance to create meaning. That dinner ended in a completely different atmosphere than when I had first walked in. No more mocking laughter or scrutinizing glances. Instead, there was a silence laced with hesitation, as though everyone was being forced to look inward. As I prepared to leave the table, my father suddenly rose and followed me. Anna, he called softly, his voice deeper than usual. I stopped in the stone hallway, the light from the wall sconce casting shadows that made him look years older. Dad, I spoke, a little unsure. He placed his hand on my shoulder, not heavy or commanding but a rare, gentle touch. You've made me look at myself differently. For years, I thought your success only came from being a Montgomery. But tonight, I see you built it entirely on your own. I'm proud of you, Anna. Truly proud. My throat tightened. How long had I waited to hear those words? I had lived in the shadow of his skyscrapers, his billion-dollar deals, never once recognized with genuine respect. I never wanted you to be proud because I was richer or more famous. I only wanted you to see that I'm living in the way I believe is right. He nodded slowly, eyes distant. I've built towers across Manhattan, but are they as lasting as the students you're lifting up? I'm not sure. Maybe it's time I start again with you, to create something that truly endures. I smiled softly, squeezing his hand. In that moment, the distance of years between us began to close. When I returned to the living room, Jason came forward unexpectedly. Gone was his usual arrogant confidence. The Ferrari outside no longer shielded him. Anna, he took a breath, his face flushed. I owe you an apology. I waited silently. I mocked you, belittled your way of life. I thought only glittering things mattered. But hearing you talk about Richard, about the scholarships, I feel empty. Honestly, I'm jealous you found meaning I never had. I was surprised. For the first time, Jason sounded sincere. Finding what matters is never too late, I said gently. You can start today. He nodded, eyes steadier. I want to join some charity work. Maybe not as grand as you, but at least I want to try helping instead of just bragging. I smiled faintly. If you're serious, I'll connect you with an organization looking for volunteers to teach kids coding. You could start there. Jason studied me for a moment, then smiled for real, without pretense, for the first time. I'll do it. My mother still sat in the corner, her eyes following everything, silent. As I approached, she set down her glass, her gaze conflicted. And I still don't understand. You have everything. Why live like an ordinary person? You could be in a penthouse, wear couture gowns, you could. I cut her off, softly but firmly. Because that's not me. I live this way not because I lack, but because I know enough. She fell quiet, her eyes wavering. I knew in her heart, the image of a perfect Montgomery was still tied to opulence. But I also saw for the first time a softness there, not just disapproval but a hint of acceptance. I can't change my thinking overnight, she admitted. But I'll try to understand you better. I placed my hand over hers. That's all I ask. That night, as I left the mansion in another Uber, one thing was clear. The Montgomery family no longer saw me the same way. My father had begun to respect me with genuine recognition. Jason, for the first time, lowered his pride to search for meaning. My mother still clung to her notions, but at least she had opened a small crack. And I knew, the changes that had just begun were only the start. 3 weeks after the dinner in Connecticut, I sat in my office on Madison Avenue, wide glass windows opening to the glowing city skyline. No more mocking laughter from relatives, just a packed schedule of meetings with nonprofits, tech partners, and bright young students. Klein Dynamics had entered a new chapter. We weren't only signing contracts worth hundreds of millions, but also dedicating a separate budget to the Coleman Foundation, the very soul of this journey. That day, I welcomed a group of high school students from Atlanta. They stepped timidly into the sleek conference room, eyes wide at the photographs on the walls. My employees working alongside communities, the first scholarship graduates holding their college acceptance letters. I told them my startup story, not about billions of dollars but about failures, sleepless nights writing code, and moments when I almost gave up. One girl asked quietly, "Miss Anna, how did you know you were good enough to keep going when everyone thought you'd fail?" I smiled, touching the watch on my wrist. Because someone believed in me before I could believe in myself. And I learned that true worth isn't what others assign to you, it's what you choose to create every day. Her eyes lit up. I saw in her the reflection of myself at 22, stepping into that tiny startup and meeting Richard for the first time. The circle was turning again, from him to me, now to the next generation. My father had changed too. He called often, not just with polite questions but genuinely wanting to hear about the foundation. He even agreed to mentor a group of students in the program. One afternoon, I visited his Manhattan apartment and found him sitting with 3 of them, teaching risk management while encouraging their pushback. The sight moved me. A man who once only cared about skyscrapers now patiently listening to a student's dream of opening a community clinic. Jason kept his promise. He began volunteering at a free coding program for kids in Brooklyn. For the first time, he sent me a photo. Himself in a chalk-stained shirt, grinning with a classroom full of children. His message was short: "Thank you for giving me another chance. I feel alive." Reading it, I knew my brother had finally found the path he'd long avoided. My mother still sent designer dresses, but instead of insisting, she slipped in notes: "If you don't wear it, that's fine. But I still want to see a little beauty in this practical world." I laughed. I didn't wear them, but I kept them all. Because in her own way, she was learning to accept me. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily. To outsiders, it was a rare artifact worth over $2 million. To me, it was a daily reminder: make every second meaningful. Whether in government meetings with underprivileged students writing their first lines of code, or quietly returning to my modest apartment, the watch stayed with me, part of my heartbeat. Richard once said, "True success isn't measured by the numbers in your account, but by the lives you touch." Now I understood more than ever. Klein Dynamics might grow into a leading tech company, but what I cherished most wasn't in financial reports. It was in emails from students. "Thank you, I received a full scholarship." Or, "I just had my first interview at my dream company." I don't know where the future will take me, an IPO, global expansion, or maybe even failure someday. But one thing is certain: Richard's philosophy has become my unshakable compass. And when I look down, watching the second hand move patiently forward, I know I'm not just wearing a watch. I'm carrying a legacy, a symbol reminding me that true value isn't for display, but for planting seeds so the next generation can harvest their dreams. Anna's story isn't just about a family dinner or a rare watch. It's a mirror of real life. True success isn't measured by luxury cars, mansions, or flashy numbers, but by the positive impact we leave behind. A major contract or a billion-dollar company may draw admiration, but lifting up the younger generation and opening doors to education is what creates lasting value. In today's world, the most precious thing isn't what we own, but what we give. What do you think about Anna's choices and how she defines success? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel to keep hearing more powerful stories about life and the changes within the Montgomery family.